Okay, so this video is about the reduced row echelon form of a matrix, and in particular to talk about like a more streamlined process of how to get the leading ones, get the zeros, and try and work that out. And I want to do it via this example, and hopefully that will illustrate what I like to do. So there's more than one way to do this, of course, and I'm going to tell you what I like to do because I feel like it is very methodical. Okay, so to begin with, okay, I like to look at the first column, okay, and notice there's a 0 in this entry. So I want the upper leftmost thing to be a non-zero thing, and so if I look in the column and I see any non-zeros, okay, then I would like to move a non-zero row, okay, which I see there's two of them, into the first row. And of course, I could move this one, but this is much more appealing. So you don't have to choose. I mean, you get to choose which one you want to do. And of course, to make your life easier, I think this one was the best one because the thing is you want to get these leading ones. So I'm going to use the magic of my iPad to do some moving around. All right. And so that first swap is one of the swaps, one of the moves you can do to transform your matrix. Now, another thing I want to do is to, once I do that, that first now entry, the first entry right here is non-zero. So I want this to become a positive 1. The leading ones have to be in the very first non-zero entry. And so here's a negative 1, that's non-zero. I want to make it a positive 1. So I divide everything by negative 1, and that's going to transform this entire row. Okay, so, or multiply by negative 1, either way. And so if I do that into my first row, that's going to convert my first row. So now I'm going to get this row that goes 1, negative 2, 1, negative 1, and then 4. Oops. And then everything else can just come over. So I'm going to go ahead and take this and copy and paste. Okay, perfect. All right, so that's my new updated matrix. What's good is I have a leading 1 now. And what I'm going to do next is I use the row that I just got my leading 1 in, okay, which is this first row, to zero out all the entries in the components below it, in the columns below it, okay? So there's already a 0 here. I don't have to worry about that. I want this to turn into a 0, and I'm going to use my first row to do it. And the way that goes is I want to take row 3 and then replace it with row 3 plus, well, I'm going to take row 1, multiply it by negative 3. And why do I do that? Because if I do that, a negative 3 times this leading 1, when I add it to this positive 3, they're going to cancel out and get me 0. And that 0 is my goal, right? I want to turn this into 0, which is already. I also want that to be 0. So doing this will take care of that. That's the process that takes care of that. All right, so let's go ahead and update my matrix here. So, whoops. Basically, get nearly the same matrix, but I'll go ahead and write it down. We're going to get 1, negative 2, 1, 4, 0, 2, negative 2, 6, and now I get 0. Oh, well, I should take, this actually, I like to sometimes it makes it nice if I write down what is this underneath. So I like to do -3 times row 1. Here's my row 1. I want to do -3 times all of that and write it down here. Okay, so I'm going to have -3, 6, -3, -12. And now I'm going to be adding these two rows up. That's row 3 plus -3 times row 1. And so I end up with 0, okie dokie, 5, -3, and -11. Okay, that's my new row 3. And so once I have this done, okay, and basically this done, so this is my first row. Now I concentrate on my new column, where I do the same thing. I look at the first entry, the first non-zero things. Well, both of them are non-zero. And since this is a nice little row where I can have multiples of stuff and do some easy division, I'm going to use this row to get, I have, see, my leading one here, and I'm zeroing out below. I want to turn now this thing here, this 2, into a leading 1 by multiplying the entire row by, or dividing the entire row by 2. So, or multiply by half, right? And we end up getting, okay, 1, -2, 1, 4. Nothing changed there. Nothing changed in the third row. 0, 5, -3, -11. And now we get 0, 1, -1, and then 3. Yep. And so what's nice is, I like to highlight it, leading 1, leading 1. Got my zeros here and here. Now I'm going to use my new leading 1 row, okay, which is row 2, to zero out the entries above and below the new leading 1 row. And so that's what I want to zero out. And I do it like I did it before. I'm going to replace row 1 with row 1 plus row 2, right? Because if I add 2, take 2 times 1, add it to here, I get 0. I also want to do row 3, replace that with what now? Well, I want to replace it with row 3. I like to repeat like I do here. Repeat. You see that I've been repeating that. So plus what? So to zero this piece out here, 5 out, I want to add it with -5 times row 2. Okay? So that's going to be my new rows. And like I said, like what I did up here, you see how I wrote this out? I like to do that, so I'm going to go ahead and do it over here. In my first, so 2 times row 2, I get 0, 2, -2, and 6. Down below I get 0, 5, -5, +5, and then -15, right? So, right, this is from, there you go, right? All right, so let's update our matrix here. So our new matrix is, now we have to add, we get 1, 0, -1, 10. 0, 1, -1, 3. Nothing happened to our second row. Our third row, 0, 0, 2, and then -26. Right? And now what do we have? Well, we have our leading ones. We've got zeros below all the and above all the leading ones. And now we do the same game again. We're going to look in the parts below where you have a non-zero row. Well, here we got a non-zero row. That's our last row. And so we want to turn this into a leading 1 now by dividing the entire row by 2 or multiplying by a half. So, right? And that's going to transform our matrix. 1, 0, -1, 10. Again, nothing happening to the first 2 rows. I'm just copying them down. And then I have now 0, 0, 1, -13. All right, that was great because now we have leading 1s. Boom, boom, boom. We have the zeros to the left of the leading 1s and above this one. And now, as before, we want to zero out above this leading 1 right here and here to get the reduced row echelon form. So we're going to use our new leading 1 row to help us. Okay, so we got to replace. This row replacement of row 1 has to be replaced by row 1 plus, okay, well, if I just add row 3 as it is, it'll zero out this element. So I'm just going to add row 3. Same with row 2. Replace with row 2 plus row 3 because it'll just zero out, right? All right, so our final row reduced echelon form of this matrix. Let me go ahead and, well, row 3 is already there, so we'll just add it. Okay, so we're going to get 1, 0, 0, and then, right, because 1 plus 0, 0 plus 0, -1 plus 1, that's 0, 10 and 13, we get -13, we get -3. Yeah. Row 2, we're going to get 0 plus 0, okay, 1 plus 0, 1 plus -1, okay, and then we get 3 plus -13, okay, and then row 3 unchanged, 0, 0, 1, -13, and boom, row reduced echelon form of the matrix. I hope that helped.